Hey Dungeons & Dragons community, I love D&D, and 5th is my favorite edition by far. But that doesn't mean it's perfect, and I think we all agree a couple adjustments could make things even better. I've done a series of those adjustments, and I'm providing them to anyone who wants them. There's no cost, feel free to download them, share them, and use them. You will find a link to the document I'm talking about today in the video description. You'll also find, if you go to my WordPress account, I've converted all of those to PDF. I know that some people have some difficulty viewing the unconverted documents, so the PDFs will be easy to view on any device. In these videos, I'll be explaining what the adjustments are and why I made any decisions for the changes I made. Today I'm going to go through my changes for 4th level spells. Now, as we get into 4th level spells, we're getting into the more powerful spells. And some of the spells I'll be talking about today wouldn't be bad spells if it wasn't for the fact that other 4th level spells were so much better. So when I'm looking at spells today, what I'm looking at the 4th level spells that maybe don't quite cut it compared to other 4th level spells. And I'll be trying to bridge that gap somewhat. My intention isn't to make any spell overpowered, but to make the spells that are maybe underpowered a reasonable choice. I also will not be looking to take any of the more powerful spells and make them worse. I don't think that does much to make the game more fun for players, and that is my goal here. So today I present 4th level spells, the Treantmonk Variant. Let's get started. So the first spell I want to look at today is Blight. Blight is a 4th level necromancy spell. It's a single target spell, and what it does is it does damage to one target, and they get a constitution saving throw for half damage. The damage, considering it's a single target, isn't great. Hitting the constitution saving throw isn't good either. So you put those two things together, and we have a pretty lousy spell. The only real advantage is if we target a plant creature or a magic plant, then it gets a disadvantage on the saving throw. But let's face it, in Dungeons & Dragons, most of our opponents aren't plants or plant creatures. So my goal here was to look at a way to make this spell effective. And I did consider just increasing the damage, but I did think there was another way that we could make this spell a little bit more flavorful and unique. So that's the way I went with this. So now Blight, 4th level necromancy spell, 1 action to cast, instantaneous. Necromantic energy washes over a creature of your choice that you can see within range, draining moisture and vitality from it. The target must make a constitution saving throw. The target takes 8d8 necrotic damage and suffers 1 level of exhaustion on a failed save. On a successful save, the target does not suffer exhaustion and takes half damage. This spell has no effect on undead or constructs. If you target a plant creature or magical plant, it has disadvantage on the saving throw. And if we target it on a non-magical plant that isn't a creature, it withers and dies. At higher levels, the damage will increase by d8 per level above 4th. So the only difference here is I've added the level of exhaustion if you fail the saving throw. I think this is appropriate considering that the spell is draining vitality from the creature. And I think it makes up for the fact that the damage isn't stellar and that we're targeting a saving throw that's probably the worst save to target. Because being able to deliver exhaustion is a pretty unique and decent effect. That brings us to our next spell, and that is Confusion. Confusion actually took me quite a while to figure out what to do with this spell. As I mentioned, some of these spells in a vacuum I wouldn't think are bad spells. Confusion is a spell that, if it wasn't for the fact that there are 3rd level spells that have similar effects and do them better, I would think Confusion was an okay spell. But that's the case. We have 3rd level spells like Fear, like Hypnotic Pattern, like Slow that do similar effects to Confusion, but they do it better. Confusion covers a small area, has a random effect, which has a decent chance of the target acting normally, and they get a saving throw every round. And you put all those together and this becomes a worse spell than the 3rd level spells we're comparing it to. And if it's a 4th level spell, it should be better. So I knew that some kind of change needed to happen. Now my first gut instinct was to simply remove the saving throw you get every round from Confusion. And I do think that would make this a good spell. I thought it might make it just a little bit too good. Because even spells like Hypnotic Pattern or Fear have a way that we can end the spell effect. Confusion needs something, some way that a target might still be able to make a saving throw if they fail their initial save. Now, most of the spell remains the same. It's still an action to cast, still concentration 1 minute, still a 10-foot radius sphere. Note that when we cast a spell at a higher level, it is the area of effect that increases, so we can increase that radius significantly if we're willing to cast with a higher level slot. And then, as usual, we have our D10 roll each round for creatures affected by the spell, and they might move in a random direction, they might lose their turn, they might make an attack against a nearby enemy or ally, or they might act and move normally. At the end of each of its turns, an affected target that has acted normally can make a wisdom saving throw. If it succeeds, this effect ends for that target. So only in the case when the creature has a result of 9 or 10 on its D10 roll will it be acting normally and thus get a saving throw at the end of its round in order to end the effect. That will make the effects of this spell much harder to shake, but not impossible. And I think that makes this probably better than most of the 3rd level spells that we would compare it to. The next spell I want to talk about is Evert's Black Tentacles, a 4th level conjuration spell. My main issue with this spell is that functionally it works very similar to Web, but in one way Web is just better, and that is if a creature succumbs to the effect of the spell, with a Web spell they can make a strength check to end the effect. With Evert's Black Tentacles they could make either a strength or dexterity check. So Evert's Black Tentacles, despite being 2 levels higher, was actually easier to end the effect of. So I thought the solution here was simply to change it so Evert's Black Tentacles now only provides the strength check, just the same as the Web spell. So if you fail your initial dexterity saving throw, a restrained creature now must be able to make a strength check in order to end the effect. Otherwise, this spell is unchanged. And that brings us to our next spell, which is Grasping Vine. Now, Grasping Vine is a bonus action spell. It uses our concentration, and what it does is it creates a vine that, once per turn, we can use our bonus action to pull somebody 20 feet. This, of course, only works if they fail a dexterity saving throw. And it's just not enough. We're using a 4th level slot in order to do some pulling of people by 20 feet using our concentration. I get that it's a bonus action cast, and that's of course an advantage if we are doing things like weapon attacks with our action. But if we're comparing this to other things we could be concentrating on, other things we could be using our bonus action for, this doesn't qualify for a 4th level effect, in my opinion, and it only lasts for 1 minute. It needed to be a little more dramatic than pulling somebody 20 feet towards the effect. So what I've done here is now you conjure a vine that sprouts from the ground to an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within range. When you cast a spell, you can direct the vine to lash out at a creature within 30 feet of you that you can see. The creature must succeed on a dexterity saving throw or fall prone and be pulled 20 feet directly towards the vine. So now the vine will pull the person prone and pull them towards the vine, which actually makes more sense thematically too. If we visualize the effect here, we have a magical vine. It grabs you, say, around your ankle, and then it yanks you towards it. Of course you're going to fall over before it drags you. The idea that you didn't fall prone in the first place actually is what didn't make any sense. So we can have the spell make more sense and be more effective at the same time. And in terms of effectiveness, it's significant. If we are pulling somebody, say, away from us by 20 feet, normally they could just move that 20 feet and more towards us on their following turn. But if they've fallen prone, then they're going to be using half their movement just to get up again. So then they may not even be able to move that 20 feet to get out of the range of the grasping vine that may grab them again the next round. That's something that's actually reasonably effective. So we're making it more thematically appropriate and more effective. Then we get to Ice Storm. Now, Ice Storm to me is an easy fix because the problem with Ice Storm was just so obvious. It just did less damage than other damaging spells. It didn't have a bigger area of effect. It didn't have a significantly better damage type. It just didn't do enough damage. So for me, the fix was simple. We just needed to make the damage in line with where it should be. So now when you cast Ice Storm, a hail of rock-hard ice pounds to the ground in a 20-foot radius, 40-foot high cylinder centered on a point within range. Each creature within the cylinder must make a dexterity saving throw. Creature takes 3d8 bludgeoning damage and 5d6 cold damage on a failed save, or half as much damage on a successful one. Note that if you upcast a fireball, the damage here is actually reasonably similar. Hailstones turn the storm's area of effect into difficult terrain until the end of your next turn. And when we cast a spell at higher levels, the bludgeoning damage will increase by 1d8 for each slot level above 4th. That brings us to our next spell, which is Phantasmal Killer. This is a spell I had big problems with, because what it would do is you would target a single creature. They would make a wisdom saving throw, and if they made that saving throw, nothing happened. If they failed that saving throw, they would be frightened, and they would take no damage. And then at the next round, they would make another wisdom saving throw. And if they failed that saving throw, then for the first time, they would take 4d10 psychic damage, which isn't a lot of damage for a 4th level spell, even if they took it after the first failed save. So for Phantasmal Killer, for me, the only reason I would consider casting it instead of Fear is for the purpose of doing damage. But having to have somebody fail 2 saves in a row before they take a single point of damage is simply not worth it, because it means in most cases you will do no damage with this spell. So I needed to change it so that the damage became more effective. So now what I've done with Phantasmal Killer is you tap into the nightmares of a creature you can see within range and create an illusionary manifestation of its deepest fears. Visible only to that creature. The target must make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, the target takes 4d10 psychic damage immediately and becomes frightened for the duration. At the beginning of each of the target's turns before the spell ends, the creature takes 4d10 psychic damage. At the end of each of its turns, the target can make a wisdom saving throw. On success, the spell ends. So I just want to note how this will work. If you make your initial wisdom saving throw, nothing happens. If you fail your initial saving throw, you're going to be frightened for at least 2 turns, and you're going to be taking a minimum of 8d10 psychic damage. Because you'll take 4d10 on that turn, and you will take 4d10 on the following turn before you make your saving throw. And then each additional saving throw that you fail, you can take another 4d10 psychic damage. This is way more appropriate damage for what we should expect from a 4th level spell. And if we increase the level in which we cast a spell, the damage, both the initial and each turn, will increase by 1d10. Then we get to Staggering Smite. This is going to follow very similar rules to what I've done with every Smite spell in the game up to now. And that is, number 1, we're going to have the initial damage of the effect equal 1d8 per level of the spell. So the initial damage of Staggering Smite will now be 4d8 psychic damage. And like with all other Smite spells that I've dealt with in my variant, we will include the ability to scale the spell. So at higher levels, when you cast a spell using a spell slot at 5th level or higher, the damage increases by 1d8 for each slot level above 4th. And that brings us to our final spell, which is Stone Skin. Now, Stone Skin is an expensive spell to cast. It requires a 100 gold piece material component, and it is a touch spell with a 1-hour concentration effect. And the whole purpose of a Stone Skin, of course, is we expend this big component, we're willing to expend our concentration, but we really want to up the defense of a creature that we touch with it. The problem with Stone Skin is it would give you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage from non-magical weapons. So if they're attacked with magical weapons, it doesn't work. Even though we're using a spell to create it, we're expending an expensive material component to create it, we're using our concentration. If we're expending all these things, 4th level slot, concentration, expensive component, you would think it would work against magical weapons. Let's keep in mind, we're not granting immunity here. This is just resistance. So now this spell will turn the flesh of a willing creature you touch as hard as stone. Until the spell ends, the target has resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage, period. No restriction to non-magical damage. Remember, this isn't a spell we're going to be casting over and over and over again. This uses 100 gold pieces worth of diamond dust every time we cast this spell. So this is a spell we're only casting in important situations. The kind of situations where maybe the damage we're taking might be magical. Stone Skin should work. And now it does. And that's it for the 4th level spells. Those are the only ones I dealt with. And next week, I'll be looking at 5th level spells as we start working towards the end of the Player's Handbook variant. Once again, if you're thinking about spells that aren't in the Player's Handbook that you would like me to look at, go ahead and mention it in the comments down below, but I didn't miss them here. I was only dealing with spells from the Player's Handbook. Now, if there are 5th level or higher Player's Handbook spells you definitely want me to look at, once again, mention that in the comments section down below. I'll read as many of the comments as I can, and I'll take your comments into account as I do those variants. Otherwise, until next time, as usual, I'm going to sit back, relax, have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everyone, and I'll talk to you next week.